Okay, so I think we can start now. We waited the diplomatic first minutes. So I'm super happy to have you with us today for this webinar. It's a very special webinar for us, and that's why we made it public, because we are launching our report on youth mobility and the role of youth information. And that's the third edition of this publication. And we had a special collaboration with André Barta, who will present the results a bit later on, with a freelance youth researcher and consultant. And yeah, it was very, a fruitful collaboration, let's say, and we are super excited to share the results with you today. Mm-hmm. So basically, for those who don't know Eurodesk, we are a European youth information network. And our mission is to raise awareness on mobility opportunities and on the ways to engage with European initiatives as a way to engage young people and encourage them to become active citizens. And we are doing this for over 30 years. And I work at the European office, but we have offices, like national offices, in 37 countries. And we work with local multipliers, so over 2,000 all over Europe. And these are youth information centers, youth centers, libraries, but also school inspectorates, so all kinds of actors who are in daily contact with young people. And this is why we conduct such a survey, because we always want to improve our services and to be in capacity to reach out to all young people. So basically, with this survey that we are releasing today, we targeted young people aged between 13 to 35 years old. And we covered 4 areas. So the first one was related to their perception of mobility and how this was impacted by the COVID-19. But we looked also at their information needs. And for those who went on the mobility, how they experienced it. So this you will discover in a few minutes. And the survey was launched in 25 languages. So this really enabled us to have a broad outreach. And we conducted it between September 21 to January 2022 with the help of our network and our partners. And we collected over 4,000 answers from 74 countries. And yeah, around 94% of the answers are from Europe. So not the European Union, like Europe in the geographic sense. Now I give the floor to André for the results.
Thank you very much, Audrey. Could we skip ahead in the presentation to my slides, starting with the 0?
Yeah, I think your presentation is paused.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So once again, hello everyone. It's great to see you all here, at least virtually. My name is André, and I have analyzed the survey. I have also authored the report, which will be coming out shortly. And I'm excited to be showing you some of the results today in the presentation. I will take it through several large areas. I will always point out some interesting results that I see from my perspective as worth further debating. And then we'll give you a floor to ask out any questions you might have. So no worries there. It's not only just me speaking, you will be given the floor as well. Before we dive into the results themselves, let's have a look at who our respondents were. As you already know, because Audrey mentioned it, we had over 4,000 responses. And out of these, there were 76% of females, 23% of males, and only 1% of respondents who chose the option other gender. This can be caused simply by females or women being more likely to fill in an online survey, because this was an online survey, because this showed in some previous studies to be the case. but it can also mirror some hopefully less severe disbalance in outreach of the youth information services. We do not really have enough information to say why this really is caused, but it's nevertheless something to keep in mind and to maybe have a look into in the future. In terms of education, the respondents in the survey were highly educated, as you can see, with almost half of them holding a university degree. This, together with the fact that the respondents from rural areas formed a minority in the survey, shows where the outreach should focus most. And it's the less educated young people and also those living in smaller settlements. But we will get to these trends also when it comes to some of the results later on. Combining some of the questionnaire items, I was also able to identify needs. So needs are the young people who are not in employment, education, or training. And these represented 8% of the sample, which again, in 4,000 respondents is quite a good survey result. So it shows that we did not only reach the well-off ones, but we also reached young people in different life circumstances. As you can see in here, our respondents had no trouble accessing the internet, with about 90% of them having home-based access and mobile access as well. In this case, the question is to what extent this really is due to the nature of the survey, which, as I already mentioned, it was an online survey. And simply just because of that, it might have attracted more of those young people with no trouble to access the internet. It again is something to keep in mind. And it's something quite common in our era of web-based surveys anyway. We can go to the next slide. What's quite interesting is that almost 80% of our respondents were only able to go abroad for a mobility opportunity with some financial help. And 20% even stated that unless all expenses are covered by an external scheme or program or grant, they are not able to participate. I think this really stresses the importance of support schemes such as the Erasmus Plus that literally allow some of the young people to go abroad who would otherwise not be able to. It also shows that the survey has reached really diverse group of young people, so not only the young people who are well off. Another interesting finding is in the domains of peers and family members with mobility experience. While young people nowadays seem to have quite a lot of peers around them who have first-hand mobility experience, the opposite is true for the family members, with almost 2/3 of young people who do not have any family members with mobility experience. We will see in the next slides that having or not having peers and family members with mobility experience around them matters to young people and to their own decision-making to go or not to go for the mobility experience. And I feel that in the years to come, we may actually be witnessing an interesting twist as more and more of the young people who are now gaining their mobility experience will be starting families, and then also will become the influence on the new generation of young people themselves, also with respect to their decision-making on the mobility experience. So let's see what the future brings, but there's interesting things to look forward to. Now let's have a look at the results of the survey. Firstly, we looked at how young people see mobility in general. You can see it in here. So the good news first, almost all young people are open to going abroad, and even groups which are less keen to do so, you see that the overall openness is only slightly lower in rural youth, in young people in unfavorable economic situations. Just so that you know who I mean by that, it's those people who are not able to go abroad unless all expenses are fully covered by support schemes. and also in needs. But once again, you see that despite them being less keen, it's not like they are absolutely not open to going abroad. They are still very much open, but you can simply see some slight differences. We can go to the next slide. In here, you can see that moreover, almost all young people see mobility experience as beneficial to their education, to their professional life, and to their personal life. In here, we can also see who appreciates the mobility experience the most. And it's the young people with high educational attainment. It's the young people from large urban areas. And it's also, as I already suggested earlier, those who have first-hand mobility experience, who have many friends with first-hand mobility experience themselves. You can see perhaps some patterns emerging. I'll get to it a bit later on when we see a bit more examples as to who scores slightly different than the overall population. We can go ahead. As for the concrete mobility types, young people are most interested in the physical mobilities, both short and long-term ones. But if you look at the blended or virtual mobility types, you can see that they are considerably less popular among young people. What this shows is that at this time in 2021-2022, what young people see under the term mobility experience is them physically spending some time in person in another country, meeting their peers, seeing and living new cultures. So perhaps at this time, the role of the blended and virtual mobilities should be carefully planned. And of course, it can be a valuable tool for certain situations, but at this point, it definitely is not a suitable tool to replace the traditional physical mobility as we have known it so far. Now, let's move on from the general perceptions to the impacts of the pandemic on mobility that the young people have shared with us. Again, let's start with the good news. So over 80% of young people are still open to going abroad to a similar extent as they were before the pandemic hit. However, when it comes to the practical side of things, about 1/4 of young people do not see going abroad to be as realistic for them as it was before the pandemic. So to summarize this, despite still being largely open to the idea of going abroad, when they go on to think in practical terms, young people simply have serious doubts about going abroad in practical terms nowadays. So you can see that the pandemic did have some effects on how the mobility of young people is or is not happening. In here, you can see further the impacts of the pandemic. Only 12% of our respondents feel that they have not missed out on any opportunities due to the pandemic. So to put it in a different perspective, 90% of young people actually think that they have missed out on some opportunities. And if you look at the concrete opportunities that they feel they have missed, the mobility opportunities are among the most mentioned. Over 60% of young people feel that they have missed out on mobility opportunities for understandable reasons due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we will also get to it a bit later when we get to the reasons for cancellations of the mobility experience that the young people have shared with us. But you can also see that the impacts have been far wider than the mobility opportunities, but that young people feel they have missed out on the personal, on professional, and educational opportunities. So there is actually quite a lot that the young people feel that the pandemic has taken away from them. As you can see, the young people mostly report negative effects of the domains in the domains of their personal, educational, and work life. And these negative effects of the pandemic are seen by about 2/3 of the young people overall. You can see that there's not really that much difference between the domains themselves. So once again, young people have been affected by the pandemic, and the effects have been seen by the young people as negative across many domains, not only just the mobility. Now, let's get away from the pandemic and let's move on from the impacts of the pandemic to the domain of youth information needs. And you can see that in our sample, most of our respondents already have at least some experience with looking up mobility-related information. You can see it's about 80% of them. You can also see the groups which are less likely to have this experience. You can see that it's basically young people under 15 and under 18. It's also basic schoolers, and it's young people from rural areas and the needs. And you can also see that in this case, the differences can actually be quite large. So whereas we overall have about 80% who have tried looking up some mobility-related information already, in young people under 15, it's only about half of them. So, and for instance, in the rural youth, it's only just about 70%. So you can see that in this case, there are actually groups of young people who simply did not really go in that direction yet. You can again see that there are some groups that I have already mentioned before. So you can see some patterns emerging, but let's wait with that. I will mention it in the next slides. We have also asked about the information channels that the young people are using. So you can see that the most used is simply the general web search. Simply just young people go online and they try to look for the information through different search engines, looking for keywords, looking for concrete things that they have in mind. Not far behind is the social media, which actually we will talk about this a bit more in the next slides. This looks like quite an important source of information for the young people. But they also mentioned formal education institutions, and I will again stop at it in one of the next slides, and the networks of peers and relatives. And I already mentioned that we maybe are about to see some changes in the future when young people who are now going abroad will actually be bringing up their own offspring. So you can see that this is actually one of the most used information channels even nowadays, and this actually can, I think, become even more important in the future as the time flies. You can also see that what is quite interesting in here is that over 27% of the respondents do not know the specialized youth information sources. What I mean by that is specific web pages and platforms such as the Eurodesk, which really are devoted to providing young people with the information on mobility opportunities. But at the same time, 95% of the respondents state that specialized websites are useful channels to receive information. So this suggests that the specialized websites such as Eurodesk are very valuable on one hand, but on the other hand, also somehow struggle to become known among the young people. And this is definitely something to tackle in the future. When we asked young people how they would like to receive mobility-related information, the most desired information channel they mentioned was the social media. You can see that it's mentioned by about 96% of the young people, so basically almost all of them. Interestingly, however, not all young people favor the same social media, as you can see in here. So we asked about a few concrete social media networks. And in here, it's 3 most favored. So it's the Instagram, the Facebook, and YouTube. You can see that overall, you go from the popularity of the Instagram, which is popular among 79% of the respondents, to the popularity of the YouTube, which is popular amongst 66% of them. But then if you actually look into different groups of young people, you see that there are differences in how these are used among them. So the Instagram is the most universal. There were basically no differences between how young people are using the Instagram. But in case of Facebook, you can see that it's most used by the young people in their 20s and 30s, and it's really not that popular with the teens. YouTube, on the other hand, is quite popular with the teenagers. So you can see that actually using these social media with respect to different youth groups can be quite useful, especially when you try to target different types of information to different audiences. It's useful to keep this in mind. You can also see, or we also asked, how young people are using the social media to look for information. And since scrolling is the most used tool, they simply look at the news feed, they click on what interests them. This also has implications for strategies used in advertising on the social media. And at the same time, young people also use the mechanisms to follow a certain organization or an individual that they find interesting. And they also join social media groups and are also then perceptive to information shared in these groups as well. So you can see that there is also something to take into consideration when you're using social media to reach young people with mobility-related information. Now, let's have a look at the youth experience with mobility. And firstly, we will explore the perspective of those who gained a first-hand mobility experience in 2020 or 2021. You can see in the heading of the slide, it says mobile. So when we say mobile respondents, we mean those respondents who went abroad in 2020 or 2021. And you can also see that overall about 30% of our respondents went abroad in 2020 or 2021. But you can also see that it was less among the young people from rural areas, but more among young people in their 20s, in the needs, and in those who have many friends with mobility experience. Again, perhaps you can see some patterns emerging in here. And you can also see that, for instance, those who have many friends with mobility experience are actually, the percentage of those who went abroad is actually 10% higher than general. So you can see some of the influences quite clearly in here. Those who went abroad in 2020 or 2021 mostly went abroad to study in a formal setting or to learn in a non-formal opportunity, or also to volunteer, as you can see in here. Erasmus Plus is by far the most used grant scheme among our respondents. And this showcases its importance and its spread among the young people in Europe. Those who went abroad learned about it through social media, and we already talked about this quite at length, so I will not be going back there, but also through specialized websites, which is, again, you can see that these really are important to young people, and it would be great to increase the visibility of those to young people. And what I would like to stress in this particular slide is the amount of school-based information sources. You can see that young people actually gain information about mobilities through different aspects of schooling. So you can see school events, schoolmates, you can see teachers. So the formal education institutions are actually quite important information partners, as they do play a large role in young people in obtaining information. And this, of course, makes sense given the huge amount of time that many young people spend in the formal education institution. It's only just something that you can see in here very clearly, and that, again, can be taken into account when you're putting together your own information strategies for mobility towards young people. We also asked young people who went abroad in 2020 and in 2021 about the obstacles that they faced. And the three main obstacles were the finances. About 30% of the young people ticked those. Then housing, about 25% of people had trouble in there, and also the traveling, about 20% of young people had trouble there. But we also have learned from the young people that 20% of all of those obstacles are related to the COVID-19 pandemic. So once again, you do see the impacts of the pandemic here in the domain of the mobility. What is interesting is that we also asked about the motivations, and you can see quite a mix of motivations that the young people have when they go abroad for their mobility experience. So you go from personal goals, such as having fun and changing their daily routines, to doing something meaningful and even to increasing employability. So the fact that young people have a wide palette of reasons for going abroad that we have known for a long time. But it seems that this pattern is still true today, and it is definitely something that should be taken into account when communicating to young people about mobility experiences, because you can see that different young people would have maybe a different mix of those, or a different, put different emphasis on each of those. But nevertheless, I mean, the palette is quite wide for why they go abroad. Another pattern that has been around for a long time is the extremely high satisfaction rate among young people who have actually attended mobility experience abroad. As you can see, young people do not only greatly appreciate their experience, but they are actually so excited about it that they are very willing to encourage their peers to go abroad. And this takes us again to the importance of the peer networks, and especially in the future, also of the family members with the first-hand mobility experience. It is also something that has been used in the information strategies in the past, and I believe that it's quite useful as well, at least from other research that I have conducted and that I know. It shows that young people sharing information in the peer network, also during, for instance, organized events such as school events, is actually quite a powerful way to share information on mobility in itself. And you can see why, because young people are simply quite excited about their experience, and they are also willing to share it. Now let's have a look at those young people who did not go abroad in 2020 or in 2021. So they mostly did not go because they simply did not plan it. And from those who did plan it and ended up not going, they shared with us that it was mostly due to the pandemic-induced complications, which again shows the extent to which the pandemic impacted the young people and the mobility domain in particular. You can see that it goes to almost 100% of the respondents whose mobility experience was cancelled or postponed due to the COVID-19. So this is, I think that this is quite, I would emphasize this as something that really had an impact on the young people, and also something that has a perspective to change in the future, hopefully. What can definitely be improved is working with those young people whose mobility experience is cancelled. Those young people who are interested, because those are the young people who are interested and they already took some first steps towards the experience, and it would actually be beneficial to follow up with them and to provide them with such support so that they can find another opportunity that suits them and are able to go abroad eventually. You can see that currently about half of the people whose mobility opportunity was cancelled did not look for any other alternatives. And this is the potential that I'm talking about, the potential that can change in the future. You can see on the positive end of things, you can also see that 22% of them found actually other alternatives abroad, and about 30% of them found other alternatives in their country of residence. So that is a positive message. And what is, I would say, a super positive message is that in case of all obstacles, in case that all obstacles would disappear, about 56% would be eager to go, and additional 35% would be open to going abroad. And now really we are talking about the young people who did not go abroad in 2020 or 2021. So you can see that the potential of the young people to go abroad and to be open to it and to be even enthusiastic about this is quite huge. And I will end up saying that you have perhaps seen some of the groups of the young people repeatedly mentioned as being less or more likely to do this and that. And we see that the outreach is once again, I would say a key, one of the key messages of this particular survey, because it's often young people from rural areas, and it's often young people who are younger or who maybe do not have high educational attainment, who would maybe need a bit more information or a bit more push to be interested or to be open to going abroad. And with this positive message, I will pass on the floor back to Audrey.
Yep. So now you saw all the results and statistics, and we thought that maybe you have questions on what was presented, because after I will present the lesson learned, which is the last part of the publication. But before we go on this, and maybe we'll reopen the floor after it to discuss more broadly what you think about the results or what they mean for our different for different actors and stakeholders reaching out to young people. We first want to collect your specific questions on the results. If there's something that you found interesting or you want more explanation on the statistics, that's the time to ask them. So I will open the chat to see. Was everything super clear? And
maybe before our guests think about questions, I can also add that Audrey mentioned at the very beginning that this was actually not the first survey, and we have also compared current results to those in the past, and they mostly overlap in terms of trends. So the trends are repeating, and we see that the survey is actually giving us something that is valid and that is actually happening over a long term.
Yes, exactly. And in terms of trends, I know like having fun and doing something meaningful is also what came up as really like the top motivations, for example, to go abroad. So at least the COVID didn't impact motivation. It's more like the practicalities, as you said, but not the willingness and to go abroad. So for me, that was an interesting result as well in this continuity and checking the results.
I completely agree, and it's you can see that you know, these practicalities, that is something that first it can change, and second we should also inform young people that it's changed. It's now open again. It's now more possible to go abroad than it was, I don't know, a year ago or something.
Yeah, indeed. And also, like a key taking for me was the 3/4 of those who didn't go. It's because they didn't even think about it, or they didn't know about it. So it's like a huge potential when we see how they perceive it as beneficial for them, but that they just don't connect that, oh yeah, that's something I could do maybe next year, or I don't know, depending on their age. So there's there's a huge potential there as well for us.
That is definitely true. And also it's a huge potential of the survey itself, because we have reached over 4,000 of young people. And only just by participating in the survey, they have also learned something, because it also gives you, let's say, a dimension into which to think forward, or maybe some information to look after, or to look for afterwards. So I think that even the survey itself can be quite beneficial in terms of spreading the information to the young people.
Yep. And I know most of them also expressed their openness for those who went abroad to be contacted by us as well to share their stories. So this was also shown in the result, but even at the end, when they clicked like, yeah, I want to receive follow-up information, I want to subscribe to your newsletter, I'm there if you want me to share my story. So we see that's another potential we have, like to really use peer-to-peer information and connect with them in the long term. So okay, so I think Andre, you made a great job, because all the stats were very well explained, and you gave a lot of background information as well as why some of the results. So then I will continue with the presentation, and then we will reopen the discussion anyway. So if you have questions coming up, you can still keep them for the final discussion round. So yeah, so in the document, I mean, there are many lessons that can be taken from the results, but still we added some already that are especially for the youth information field, but they are really also interesting for anyone, in fact, communicating or targeting young people in their communication. So I will start with policy conclusions, because we see that we believe strongly, and we see in the results, that mobility should remain a policy priority. When we look at the very positive perception of mobility for young people and how they see it's beneficial for their professional, personal life, but also the positive results and impact it has on them, on those who went abroad. And there are many more studies from RAY or from ESN. I know there are many research that shows the impact it has on their skills development, on their personal confidence. I mean, it's so well documented. So this survey is bringing, again, like more evidence on the benefits of mobility for young people. And this is very much in line with the EU Youth Strategy that highlights mobility as a priority area. So those results really emphasize this dimension. And the other dimension is the focus on inclusion and reaching out to all young people, which is also a priority of the strategy. And in this survey, you saw, I mean, Andre pointed to it, that there are multiple disadvantages related to participating in mobility experiences abroad, but also in accessing the information. And there we really want to stress again the importance of youth information and making it available where young people are, and also support services especially for specific groups, and for example, the partnerships with schools, and making sure everybody knows about such opportunities. And then these are more general recommendations when targeting young people. The first one is really to adapt the communication strategies by segmenting audiences. For example, I mean, Andre gave a lot of explanation on like young people in their teens, in their 20s, or in their late 20s and early 30s. They have different expectations when it comes to mobility. For example, young people in their teens will be more in the planning. Oh yeah, it's true, like I could do like one semester abroad when I go to university. So it's more like in the prospective stance, but those who in their late 20s or early 30s, maybe they will be more interested in internships abroad, etc. So when the messages, like when there are like, I don't know, like when we I don't know, post on social media, the message should be adapted, the opportunities as well should be selected well and addressed to the right group of young people, I think, to make it as efficient as possible. And at the same time, using the social media channels that are used by those different audiences and keeping up to date on trends, because things change very fast. And like now TikTok is coming up. So, I mean, there are many, it evolves very fast. So we need to keep up to date with trends. And then in terms of the communication is also to connect this. I mean, for example, like being online and having a strong digital strategy, but also having specific outreach activities, especially for those with, as I said, with disadvantages, or those living in rural areas, or those from less affluent backgrounds. So again, the messages can be adapted to their specific needs. For example, you can have like maybe hybrid opportunities, or there are other ways to participate, or like in the type of opportunities you promote. But also you can also focus on the support. So if you target young people with disabilities, then maybe you reinforce the message that, okay, like Erasmus Plus has this and this support scheme for making your mobility possible. So like this, you remove and you take out obstacles for them to participate. And we also mention a list of activities that can go like local face-to-face events and sessions, partnerships with schools, for example, again, like having I don't know, being invited and presenting information when you have a parents association meetup, or I don't know, any type of school activities that is a bit more non-formal, but also in the classes. I mean, there are many ways to partner with schools and bring the information there. And also use other actors. So we thought about like the social and the youth workers, but also the other support professionals who are in direct contact with those specific target groups. So that's a way really to reach, and they know maybe the messages that works best with their audience, and they also have this face-to-face contact. And the last, well, there are more in the document, but it's to have web inclusive information. So also to think about different audiences when you develop your website, etc., that it's always inclusive. And there are many guidelines around like to make it more inclusive. And then there's a whole pack related to making youth information sources and services more prominent. So that was highlighted in the stats that we are not ranked, I mean, for the whole respondents, they didn't rank youth information services as a top source they would look for. Like when they look for mobility information, they will look on search engine, they will look on social media, they will ask their parents, but they don't know that specialized services are there to help them from A to Z, like to plan their mobilities. And at the same time, they tell us, and I see when I go to events, they say, it would be so nice to have local info points where to get this information in one place. I was like, yeah, that's Eurodesk. So there's really a gap between what they express as a need and what already exists. And it's, there's a disconnection there in terms of behaviors and needs. So we need to connect and we need to be known by young people. And an opportunity we have as well is to partner with young people themselves as peers and have them share their experiences. We already mentioned there's a huge potential because they're willing to do it and they're very eager to share their stories and motivations. So there we recommend as well, like to have them sharing their motivations to go abroad, because we see like this is very important, of course, to trigger and to inspire others to go abroad. And favored format are non-formal formats, again, as we mentioned before, where people can share stories and exchange. I think this is more powerful than making a presentation, for example, on how to apply, etc. This can come next when they come back to the national agencies or to their Eurodesk to get the concrete practical information. And of course, you saw that we clearly saw a huge impact of the pandemic and how it created new obstacles for young people who went abroad, but also those who didn't go abroad. So we believe there is a need for support and youth information services to help them navigate these uncertain times and to ensure that, well, to explain to them how they're going abroad and having a mobility experience can still be a safe and satisfying experience, that it's still possible, but also to keep them updated on current measures. So when they go abroad, so that they find relevant information if they go to another country or what they need to plan and prepare, so that they feel a bit safe also when they plan, and that's not preventing the decision to go abroad. And that's a quote from the publication, that obtaining reliable, inclusive and accessible youth information can help them boost their motivation and confidence on mobility experiences, which will contribute to their personal and professional development. And then the final conclusion that we also put in the report, that we have this survey every second year now. It's the third one, but every year we grow the number of respondents, etc. But I think it's important, for the next one, even we are already thinking how we can even make it bigger and maybe partner with national agencies or other partners to make it even bigger, to collect evidence, to improve mobility information, I mean, for Eurodesk, but also for national agencies and for other civil society organizations working with and for young people, and really to use it as an opportunity to promote the services that exist through the campaign, as well as André also mentioned. So that's for my part. And as I said, I'm sure there are many more lessons to be learned from this report. We are very proud to disclose the results. And just a practical information, the actual publication is under production now, and it will be released by the end of the month. So you will all receive the publication, and of course we will share it on our different social media channels. Okay, I see there something happening in the chat.
Yes, I can take over if you want to, because I had a chance to look at the chat continuously. So, for instance, Sylvia is asking if we can conclude that newsletter/email is no longer really popular. That is not the case. In the publication itself, you will see that we asked about quite a number of different channels that can be used to deliver this information. And email newsletters are actually considered useful by over 80% of the respondents. So it's not like they are not considered useful. We have only just not mentioned them in here in this presentation because they are not among the top of the top. But you will see that the young people are actually considering quite a wide palette of information channels to be useful. And email newsletters definitely are one of them. As Audrey mentioned, for instance, one of the things that they could do in this survey would be to submit their own email and to say, hey, I want to receive a newsletter, and quite a few of them did actually. So do not worry, email newsletters are still happening, and it's still one of the tools to be used.
What is clear is traditional media is not popular. So having ads on TV or things like that are very costly as well. These are not popular.
Exactly. TV, magazines, newspapers, radios, that is where young people really are not present these days. And you will clearly also see it in the publication, because there you go really down, and you go from these channels where you get about 80% of people who say that it's at least somehow useful. You get to, I don't know, 10 or 20% of people who say that it's useful, and the rest is not really.
Yeah. And I can answer the question of Sylvie. So yeah, there will be templates and social media templates to promote the results as we did in the previous editions.
I can focus on the question from Malgo on the needs. They are actually taken into account in each of the analysis, and they are detailed. I mean, the results, if the results differ or needs from the general survey population, then it's always stated in the survey. I only just, you know, here in the presentation, we really just chose the top results, or what we considered the most interesting results. So if you read through the report, I think you will find quite some information on the needs. And for instance, one of the surprising ones was that they were actually more likely to go abroad than the general population during the pandemic. About 35% of the needs went abroad, and the general ratio was 30%. So there is interesting information in there. I definitely do agree that we can also focus on it more in the future. What could also help us in the future surveys to focus more on the needs would be to also utilize other formats than the online survey. But perhaps if there is a chance to also go and meet some of the people offline, because not all of the young people, and especially in the category of needs, perhaps have you know, this great access to the internet that I described that the young people in this particular survey really had.
Yeah, I think the one dimension we should really focus on is getting men to answer the survey, because as you saw, over 70% of respondents are female. So there we have like really a gender imbalance that we really have to address. So we will also think about it when we promote the survey, that we can have maybe like gender-based communication, so that to attract men as well to answer the survey. Or I mean, we will have to make a specific strategy there to have a more balanced picture and to overcome obstacles for men's participation in such surveys. So this is something for sure we will consider, because this is not, yeah, it doesn't represent the youth population, let's say, this gender imbalance, let's say, in respondents. So, and
well, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Audrey. I agree, but I also would like to say that it is actually possible that it somehow is, you know, that the imbalance is not only in the survey, but that maybe it's also that simply males are less interested overall in that type of information. So it also can be something to keep in mind for, you know, further, I would even say for future surveys, and to even keep your eyes open when you work within the field to see if maybe it's not the case that simply males are not as interested overall in this type of information as the females. I see Malgo having her hand up.
Yeah, if I could say something. So first of all, thank you very much for the clear presentation on the results, which are very interesting, very helpful, as I said in my previous comments. They confirm some of our observations as well, and give us clear signs where we should go, you know, in the future, where we should be more active and so on. I just wanted to say maybe a few words regarding emails. What I noticed is, because we have to answer queries from young people who have questions about Discover You, for example. I've been answering repetitively similar questions. For example, regarding emails, they should have received from the Commission and they never read, right? So that happens regularly. They don't read the emails. Then even we work with young ambassadors who are mostly students in the early 20s. They don't read the emails. I have a son who is 20 years old. He doesn't read his emails. So I think there is something which is happening now with the emails, where I really have issues, but also our multipliers don't read the emails. So I don't know if there's overload with emails, if we send them in the wrong way. I already signaled to the European Commission to not use certain words like congratulations, where emails land in the junk folders. But I think in general terms, there is an issue with reading emails. My son doesn't read any emails. He uses, you know, Instagram, Snapchat, and other channels. So I think it's always very challenging for us to follow where young people are and address them in the best way. Another observation is, I was at the European event on Europe Day on Monday with transition year students, so they're between 14 and 16 years old. And I try to apply some tricks that I heard recently at the Eurodesk network meeting in Budapest from one of my colleagues. So instead of giving them a flyer and a pen and saying goodbye, I just said, you can have a pen, but I have something much more interesting for you. And I was like, what? I said, like, would you love to travel? Oh, yes, we would love to. You know, we stayed at home for 2 years, blah, blah, blah. Where would you like to go? Yeah, maybe France, because we learn French. Did you know that your school could run school exchanges? No, we didn't. Talk to your teachers, blah, blah, blah. So that shows that on the one hand side, we have to follow the social media, everything online. On the other hand side, we still need to have a conversation with them, you know, like face to face, and have a normal conversation, not just overload them with information, with flyers, with all the kind of like beautiful European promotion jargon and so on, but just to talk to them. And that confirms as well that it's very important, I think, to work with ex-volunteers, with young people, but for us as well to really pay attention to the language that we use, because the EU jargon is just really not clear. And I work in Ireland where young people are native speakers. And if you say like mobility, they said, well, you know, like wheelchairs and so on. So I think there's lots of really important stuff we have to consider when we communicate, when we want to promote something, you know, is it online, is it offline, what language do we use, how do we speak to young people? And maybe the last remark is also, if we look at the numbers of young people who would like to go abroad and so on, I think it's important to see if this is something that would be beneficial for a young person. Not everyone has to go abroad, you know, some young people can find something where they are and they're happy with it. So I wouldn't also like make this something where we try to force somebody and increase numbers, but really to you know, look at where they are in their life. Do they need this? Do they need that? This is just an opportunity, you know, it's not something where we have to promote this at any price. And I think in the current context of, you know, the post-COVID in Ireland, it's also important, the post-Brexit, but also the war in Ukraine and so on. I think it's also important to show to young people and those who work with them the benefits of connection with other young people from other countries, you know, the benefits of meaningful travel as well. So maybe I said too much. I've been working for Eurodesk for 18 years, so I've been kind of like following different developments, you know, and I think we are doing great work, which could be improved, but it's also important to put it in the global context so that young people, parents, teachers, and so on also see the real benefits of what we call the European mobility. Okay, thank you. I think I said too much, but I get to let it go. So thanks. And thanks again for this presentation. I hope we can share it as well with our multipliers and colleagues, because it's very insightful. I think it's very important also for the national agencies to see all the tendencies, you know, and how we can reach out to our audiences. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margot. I will shortly react if I can. I mean, as for the emails, that's an interesting information, and I think it's really worth looking into it further. As for the different communication channels, I also think that it's about distinguishing the type of information that you're sharing, and that when, for instance, when young people really like to see their information coming through social media, I really also think that what they have in mind is this, it's like this first general, you know, info push, but it's not really when they really want to have the concrete set of information that they really have some concrete questions, they go to the specialized websites. So I think that there's also, you know, different roles, different information roles for different channels. And when you say to really have also, you know, not the mobility for the sake of mobility, but the mobility for the sake of what it really gives the young people, I couldn't agree more. And for instance, our results suggest that still the physical mobility is still like the most popular one and the most attractive one. but it doesn't say that the hybrid or the virtual mobilities are useless or that they are not popular at all. And I believe that they have their uses, especially when it comes to young people who, for whatever reason, do not want to or cannot simply easily travel. So that can be like one of the tools which could be very useful for them. And it can even be, for instance, a virtual mobility or a hybrid mobility could be like a first step towards physical mobility, for instance. But it always depends on what the needs of the young person are. And I also agree that using information or sharing information in such a format which is youth friendly is absolutely key, because like you said yourself, that the word mobility, even for instance, I come from the Czech Republic, and nowadays I would say that it's people would know, but a few years back they would simply look at you and say, what are you talking about? I really don't know. So that's definitely something to keep in mind.
Yeah, so it's all about our kind of flexibility and adaptability as well to each national or local context and situation as well. I think in Ireland, for example, it's very popular to talk about travel and traveling, and then explain, what that can involve or include as well. But yeah, it's very insightful. Thank you.
There is actually much more in the publication itself. So go even beyond the presentation when the publication is out.
We will, thank you.
Yeah, I see Sophie is also commenting on the need to reach out to needs, because indeed, like as you saw in the conclusion is that we have to segment the audiences and diversify the messages, like the social media channels we use, etc., and reach out to specific groups through different partnerships, for example. So we know it's like having an inclusion strategy is it can be challenging with limited resources, but it's something we want to do and that we all try to do. So there's a lot of learning. I know we have a training in Dublin on inclusion and support services. So that's also for my colleagues that they have to sign up by Friday. But this is something we will tackle as well together in learning from each other as well, like what works, what doesn't work with the different groups, and to learn and grow our capacity in reaching out to young people in various situations. And also Sophia comments on the eco-mobility and how this can be appealing. So, and I think this echoes what Margosada said, that when we communicate, it's all about stories, motivations to go abroad, or the benefits that they can get. And then all the practical information that is maybe less sexy for them can come when they are hooked and they are motivated to go. That's when this type of information can come.
I definitely agree. I have also shared a link to one of publications of mine with a colleague of mine, where we have devoted some thinking to this green side of mobility and what it can mean for the mobility sector when we are talking about sustainability. And I completely agree that young people are sensitive to the issue. I can also see it from my perspective. I can see it when I conduct interviews and everything. So it definitely is like one of the aspects to also keep in mind. And maybe we can have a look at it in the next survey as well as one of the areas.
Great. Are there more questions? You can either raise your hand and we can give you the permission to talk, or you can ask in the chat. And while you consider this, I would just share also information that the webinar is recorded. I mean, this you know, but we will make it as well available. So for those who couldn't attend today, they can still watch it So don't hesitate to share it with people you think will be interested by it. Feel free to share it. Good. Then if there are no more questions or comments, I think we can close this webinar. I hope you are now very curious to dig into the publication and discover all the results. I mean, it's a very comprehensive report, as you will see. So thank you very much for your participation. Thank you very much, André, for this fruitful collaboration. And let's keep in touch. Thank you, everyone.